terrifying theoretical challenge. It uses a specific biological anomaly to really force a confrontation between fundamental physics and the nature of consciousness itself. The context is the existential threat posed by synthetic mirror bacteria.
Right. And these are organisms built with D-amino acids and L-sugars. So they're constructed entirely back to front compared to all life on Earth. This makes them, for all intents and purposes, invisible and invulnerable to our biology.
Exactly. And that brings us to our central question. Does this threat primarily confirm the fatal constraints of our specific molecular asymmetry, what we could call the doom? Or does this crisis actually act as a necessary catalyst, pushing us toward a higher dimensional consciousness that transcends these limits, the key, so to speak?
And I'll be arguing that this threat is definitive proof of an absolute physical constraint. It's an unavoidable doom rooted in molecular architecture, and it's a problem that can't be solved by, speculative metaphysical frameworks.
And I'll be arguing the opposite, that this crisis exposes a fatal flaw in our very way of thinking, and that it's the necessary push we need to embrace a systematic, geometric shift, the key to our survival.
Okay, so let's just lay out the doom then. The necessity of homochirality, our specific use of L-amino acids and D-sugars, is for Earth life absolute. It's non-negotiable. So when you introduce a life form that uses the opposite, you immediately have a physical barrier. Our enzymes, which are themselves chiral, simply cannot interact or break down these mirrored molecules.
The threat proves that being just as ordered, but with the wrong order, is just as fatal as being completely disordered. It's a lock-and-key failure. You can't digest D-amino acids. Your body can't use L-sugars. The entire metabolic infrastructure just stops. This proves the constraint is an existential, physical limitation.
I accept the observation, of course, the enzymatic failure is real, but I see the root cause very differently. To me, the mirror bacteria are the biological analog of a systemic epistemological failure. The severity of this threat, I think, proves that the viability, the autopoiesis of life depends on actively managing complexity, not just on the specific chemical parts we happen to use.
Okay, but how is it epistemological? It's chemistry.
Well, the failure is fundamentally cybernetic. Our evolved defense mechanisms, our enzymes, our immune systems, they all lack the capacity to recognize an equally ordered but oppositely handed life form. It's a textbook violation of Ashby's law of requisite variety. We designed a system that just assumed its specific LD configuration was the only game in town, and in doing so, it attenuated away the variety needed to defend against its own mirror image. So the key, therefore, has to be adopting a framework like PSOPUM. This framework models consciousness not just as, neurons firing, but as a geometrically structured high-dimensional reality. That 4.8-dimensional fractal attractor you see in EEG data. The existence of this threat mandates that we seek a structural redesign based on those principles to achieve a more durable, integrated reality.
I understand the VSM principles you're bringing in, but let's get back to the biochemistry. Even if you invoke the viable system model, VSM System 1, the operational units, like cells, it's not just failing because of variety attenuation. It's failing because of a chemical impossibility. Homochirality is the fundamental signature of life for a reason. The specific 3D structure of our proteins absolutely requires that handedness. The mirror bacteria, they aren't just confusing our defenses, they're completely inert to them. They can't be digested, antibiotics don't work, and they consume nutrients that become biologically useless to us. That is the doom. It's this absolute chemical specificity. Our biological architecture is fixed. So why do you insist this physical doom has to be solved by moving into abstract information geometry?
I see you're emphasizing the immediacy of it, but let me offer a different perspective. If the solution were purely chemical, say, we just invent mirror antibiotics, the source material itself suggests this would only prolong the inevitable. That, to me, indicates the problem isn't the current lack of a mirror tool. The problem is the structural limitation of being trapped in a single, fixed chiral reality. The failure is cybernetic because our entire evolutionary path made this mistake of reducing the variety of existence down to just the LD configuration. That's why System 1 fails. It lacks the requisite variety to even map the possibility of the opposite order. The solution, then, is learning to perceive the structural symmetry and its inverse, which CPT symmetry tells us must exist, through the lens of information geometry.
That's a fundamentally flawed premise when you're facing a biological threat. You are moving from a verifiable, testable biological constraint to an unfalsifiable metaphysical claim. We are not informationally blind, we are chemically specific. A left glove cannot productively interact with a right hand. It's that simple. And let's talk about the immediate societal danger, which you have to acknowledge is paramount here. The source material is terrifyingly specific. Unchecked proliferation, consumption of nutrients, inevitable ecosystem breakdown. Agriculture, non-human life, everything. If these bacteria get into the soil, they render essential nutrients inert. We would literally have to say goodbye to agriculture. This is a physical, immediate, world-ending catastrophe, not some nuanced cybernetic oversight.
That's a fair point, though I would frame that societal risk differently. The environmental breakdown you describe is the physical manifestation of our collective doom, and it comes from the exact same structural defect. Our societal systems suffer from the same disease, variety attenuation. We suppress complexity, dissent, uncomfortable truths, the societal analogs of the mirror structure, and we push them into a collective shadow. This rigidity, this fear of complexity, creates what the framework calls a collective parallax error, where we mistake our tiny viewpoint for absolute reality.
I'm sorry, but I just don't see the connection.
The connection is that the biological failure to recognize the mirror bacteria is a perfect analogy for our societal systems failing to recognize legitimate alternative structures. And the pressure from this repressed complexity eventually leads to this violent, systemic swing of an antiadromia. The key, then, is the geometric and psychological shift described by what's called the new language, the 4.8-dimensional geometric structure of consciousness. This is what lets us break free from the 3D perceptual prison and gives us the variety to handle the complexity that is, right now, destroying us.
I find that geometric interpretation speculative at best, and it dangerously abstracts a critical physical failure. The threat isn't psychological. The threat is that the bacteria are eating the food we need to survive. You are defining an existential physical failure, the collapse of every metabolic pathway on Earth, as a metaphorical psychological problem. The concepts of parallax error and hyperstition are compelling, sure, but they don't stop a bacterium from replicating. The source says even our most ingenious countermeasures would only prolong the inevitable. That isn't a suggestion for introspection, it's a testament to the absolute nature of the constraint. Shouldn't our focus be on a physical, testable defense rather than searching for a higher dimensional escape hatch?
But it's not an escape hatch, it's about structural understanding. Look, if the physical constraint is absolute, and if 3D countermeasures only delay the inevitable, then we have to look deeper. We have to look at the physics that mandates the existence of this mirrored life in the first place. The deeper architecture, as described in peace amount theory, is built on CPT symmetry, charge parity time symmetry. The CPT theorem basically mandates a mirrored reality. The mirror bacteria aren't a fluke. They are the physical manifestation of the mirrored structure predicted by fundamental quantum field theory. The threat forces the unification.
That is an immense leap. You're claiming that CPT symmetry, a principle from high-energy particle physics, necessitates adopting a specific cosmological model to combat a biological threat. The jump from LD chirality to 4D cosmology is where the credibility just falls apart for me. The peace amount model. It describes consciousness as a 2D vortex surface in a 4D quantum superfluid substrate. Its transition, the key, is a topological sphere eversion. This is purely speculative geometry. Yes, I acknowledge the 4.8-dimensional EEG attractors, but those are measures of complexity in phase space. They are not proof of extraspatial dimensions. The physical constraint of molecular asymmetry remains the heart.
testable fact. The geometric solution is an unfalsifiable metaphysics that fails the test of parsimony.
I'm not convinced, because that unification is exactly what's needed to move past what the material calls infantile 3D solutions. When we face CPT symmetry, we recognize that the LD asymmetry in our world is an uncompensated p-symmetry violation. We are structurally incomplete. The geometric models, the sphere aversion, conformal geometry, these are mathematically rigorous tools. They're designed to maintain information preservation and continuity of self-awareness during these state shifts. This geometric key is the only way to achieve the systemic variety required to process the mirrored reality without, tearing the fabric of our own existence apart. If we ignore this deeper architecture, we are condemned to solve a four-dimensional problem with three-dimensional tools.
But the viability of life is rooted in chemistry that stabilizes complex structures, not the speculative geometry of consciousness. We know why our enzymes fail. We know why proliferation is unchecked. Life fights entropy with absolute specific order, homochirality. The mere bacteria bypass that by achieving an opposite specific order. This proves that viability depends on maintaining one specific standard against both disorder and opposite order. The doom is the evidence that the structure requirements of autopoiesis are non-negotiable chemical constants.
And I still maintain that the mirror bacteria are the ultimate empirical evidence of a systemic failure to manage requisite complexity, variety, attenuation. This biological doom is the catalyst demanding we embrace the key, the geometrically coherent PSUMOT framework, to structurally redesign our very understanding of viability. This shift allows us to perceive the whole structural reality, integrating the mirror world that CPT symmetry demands, and thus creating a durable, systemic solution.
And I believe the threat of mirror bacteria is a physical doom rooted in the non-negotiable constraints of molecular architecture. While the geometry of consciousness is a fascinating area of research, it remains an abstract extrapolation. It doesn't offer a relevant defense against a low-level, high-impact biological crisis. We have to prioritize the physical constraint of chirally specific autopoiesis that ensures our survival in the world we actually inhabit.
I suppose the Mirobacterium forces us to confront whether our existence is fundamentally defined by the stringent specificity of our current molecular building blocks, or by the potential for a higher dimensional understanding to perceive and adapt to the complexity that currently threatens to destroy us.
There is clearly much more to explore in how these fundamental constraints, whether you see them as chemical or geometric, ultimately shape the fate of any complex system.